Haliburton, obviously going down, unfortunately, with that Achilles injury. What do you think that means for the East as you look at that injury?
Well, I think first of all, the injury, just like the Jayson Tatum injury, the Dame Lillard injury, knowing those guys are either out for the whole season or most of the season next year, makes it just so wide open. I think, look, Cleveland had the year that they had, best record in the East, and probably come out as favorites again. But they've disappointed regularly in the playoffs. So I don't think anyone considers them some unbeatable force, any sure thing. I think odds makers already have made the Knicks the favorites for next year, which is really odd, not knowing who's coaching or what's happening. The one thing for the Knicks is this year things worked out great. You and I know, and anybody watching knows, Thibodeau milks every bit of blood from the stone with the team. Won 51 games, got to the conference finals, and we're pretty good, luckily, with injuries this year. Obviously, Mitch missed most of the year, and then the Jalen Brunson ankle, late in the year. But for the most part, they didn't have any devastating, big losses of injuries for long periods of time. And does that happen next year? Does OG Anunoby, his history, sort of come into play? Or does he do what he did last year and be out there almost every game? These are things that next coach is going to have to consider in expectations. That can they live up to what they were this year, or was that the absolute ceiling for this team?
Yeah, and also to me, where does Orlando end up? How big of a jump do they take with the Desmond Bain trade that they made? That's a
Yeah.
pretty good team on paper,
And,
and
and Detroit, we saw in the playoffs,
yes,
are a hard team to play.
yes, and they're not going anywhere. And then we saw last night Boston sending out Drew Holiday to Portland. To me, that's one of a few moves that the Celtics are likely to make here as they, I think, try to just shed some money because that tax
Yeah,
bill becomes so onerous for that new ownership group. It's just crazy. Porzingis' name, Kristaps Porzingis' name has been bounced around a lot. The thing that I
yeah,
wonder there with Boston and the money is like, do you re-sign Al Horford? Can you re-sign Al Horford? If you can't re-sign Al Horford, would he consider taking less money? That what the Knicks exception, would he consider that to come to New York? Obviously, we know the relationship with Karl Towns. Towns saw him as a mentor, even going way back to their days on the Dominican national team when Towns was very young. So that's
yeah.
kind of what I look at with Boston and the money situation, just from a Knick perspective. What do you see, Steve?
Well, I think free agents, they're going to have to see a reality and let people go. Because I was talking to somebody about this in the league earlier. It's, you know, we've all heard Kristaps' name, but business is so hard for them because they don't need to just lose his 30 million in a trade. If they bring 30 million back, they're in the same situation. They
Right.
need to find holes in other people's caps. Um, it's real tough. I mean, I think they were entering this offseason looking at a over $500 million tax bill. And I think when new ownership takes hold, that is not something they want to do. Be a repeater on this second apron. They've got a long way still after the holiday deal to get out under it, and very restrictive ways to do it. So I think any of the free agents, I think Luke Cornett, Horford, I think any of those guys are probably long shots to stay in Boston, and you start finding holes where roster spots where they can fit. Big men, I think, are at a little bit of a premium this offseason in a way they haven't been lately. We've seen teams kind of looking for that, rim protecting defense, which I think is interesting to the Knicks with what they do with Mitchell Robinson in the final year of his contract. And as we talk about help that they can get, they could open up room if they move Mitch. It's a pretty good chunk of money that they can move with him in an expiring contract. I think that's something worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah, and then they could get underneath that first apron, I believe, which gives you access to that bigger exception. I think that
Yeah,
exception would start at 14 million, as opposed
yeah,
to where they currently are with the $5 million exception. And a few days back, the day of Game 7, Kevin Durant moved to Houston. I know you had reported it, and I'd been saying it. I never thought the Knicks were in there in a serious way. I know that there was, I think, some reports from ESPN that the Knicks were interested and were one of the suitors, but I never got the sense that that was going to be a real thing. that they were actually going to give up what it took to get him and then extend him. So your thoughts there on how that played out for Durant?
Yeah, there's not a lot of openness among the Knicks front office, but that was one I heard
Yeah.
pretty openly that they were not going to be a bidder for him. And look, it didn't make sense. As great as Kevin Durant is, and he's still amazing and still great at his age, but the injuries, the possibility when you get at this age, it just and what they would have to give up again, locked in by the apron, by the CBA, they were going to have to give up a lot of talent, either a Karl Anthony Towns or multiple players, starting with either Bridges, Anunoby kind of player, and then something else maybe like Robinson. It was going to be a huge ask for them to get in the bidding on that, and I got the sense they were never interested at all.
Yeah, the extension piece to me is interesting because that's where, obviously, if you're Durant, you want to go somewhere that they're going to sign you for that 3-year deal, whatever it may be. And I guess there hasn't been much reporting on the Rockets yet in terms of extending, but I know like a lot of the teams that had interest in Durant, I think the Timberwolves included, were wary of that extension, the idea of giving him that full 3-year extension and having him play into, I guess, what would it be, late 30s. Obviously, he's going to be able to score until he loses his driver's license, but you worry about a guy kind of breaking down and you're giving him that kind of money at the end of his career. It's a risky proposition. And obviously Houston willing to roll the dice. Ime Udoka, who we mentioned earlier, gets his guy in Durant. And for the Knicks, they do have some kind of end of the roster business to take care of. There's a team option for PJ Tucker, which I don't know what you think, Steve. I think they're going to decline it because if you want to bring him back, you could do so on a smaller deal. So I would assume that that's the case. What's your read there?
That's what I had written earlier, was that possibility of doing it on a cheaper deal. One, you didn't use him at all this year, so I don't know if you even want him. He is respected in the locker room. He is that kind of guy, and maybe the next coach does find some use for him. But what I've heard is that they could pick up the option and use that as part of a trade package,
right?
As a possibility. So I have heard some rumblings about that, possibly getting it picked up to use it as a chip.
Yeah, I think that was the idea with the team option, if there's something there. The other thing from a trade perspective is, when do you extend Mikal Bridges? If you extend him, let's say you do it on June 29th, June 30th, then you cannot trade him for 6 months. So you're talking about a significant trade. If you see the Knicks go ahead and extend Bridges and he puts pen to paper June 30th, July 1, you could pretty much count them out, I think, on a significant deal for a star. Obviously, Towns is tradable at any time, but that to me also is something to keep an eye on. But where are you on Landry Shamet? You think he's a guy who comes back, who they discard? I mean, I know that Tom Thibodeau was a big proponent, supporter of Shamet. So now without Thibodeau there, I think it's less likely that he's back. What's your read there?
Well, exactly what you said. We just don't know because we knew what Thibodeau felt about him.
Mm-hmm.
And him being injured early and fighting his way back through it. I think Thibodeau felt that there was a spot for him next year. Who knows now? And on the Bridges thing, the one thing I've said all along is that's interesting is with him, it's the Knicks front office has shown if they don't want to extend you, they're not letting you get to free agency and walk. They're going to find a way to get what they can for you and make a deal. And they did it with, Emmanuel Quickly. They did it with Julius Randle. They did it with Obi Toppin.
Yep.
Guys that they didn't want to, if they didn't want to give that extension that they felt it was going to cost, they move you. So I don't know. I felt all along that maybe that was going to be the case with Bridges this summer, but the price they paid for him, I'm a believer after years of watching the league that sunk cost theory of economics. Don't worry about what you paid for him. If he's not part of your future, make the move and get what you can. But I think that, one, a new coach coming in, two, some of the things he did in the postseason, I think maybe portends that the future will be better for him than much of the regular season was. So I think that's worth watching. I just can't. We can't get a sense of all these things until we know who the coach is, what they value.